Okay, here we go with episode 533 of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. It's Monster Kid Radio. My name is Derek M. Cook. I'd like to welcome you to the show by playing a little bit of music like we always do. This week we are playing a song from the band the Kingarulas. They are based out of Brazil. The song is called Gimme Gamma Ray. It's from their EP release, Dr. Gory is a Tiki. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes to their Bandcamp page, which is kingargulas.bandcamp.com. That is spelled Kingargoolas. Go check them out when you're done listening to this episode of the podcast. This week, we have the return of somebody who's not been on the show in quite some time. It's author Micah Harris, and we're going to be talking about a movie that up until the day we actually recorded that conversation, I had never seen before. It's 1932's Dr. X. It's a pretty cool film. Got a lot of firsts, got a lot of connections to a lot of other things, and you can see where things were. You know what? It's just a fun conversation that I had with Micah. We talk a lot about film preservation and looking for like alternate versions of films, and you know, it's just a good time. Of course, we've got Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland, and this time around, Famous Monsters actually spoiled the big reveal of Dr. X. So when you go into Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland, just be aware that you're about to get spoiled about the movie. I'll play Dracula's Warning, of course, as well. Before that, we have Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review. Big shout out to Mark and his son, Andy. Andy is moving away and moving on. And you know what? That's awesome. Andy's a cool guy. I've met him briefly in passing at various monster bashes, and, well, I've listened to him for years when he was podcasting with his father, and it's just exciting to know that he's going to be interning on some film production stuff. How cool is that? Anyway, we're going to get to all of that right now.
I am Dr. Lee Cushing. Welcome to my Chamber of Horrors.
Dr. Cushing's Chamber of Horrors is a serialized monster rally novel in the tradition of the classic Universal and Hammer horror films. It's written by Stephen D. Sullivan, the award-winning author of White Zombie, Daikaiju Attack, Manos, The Hands of Fate.
My goal is to recreate the thrills of the Monster vs. Monster films that we all love. We'll have vampires, werewolves, mummies, psychic twins, and scheming madmen. And that's just in the first storyline.
Now you can get Dr. Cushing's Chamber of Horrors and other monster stories sent directly to your email for as little as $1 a month. For just $2, you'll get all the chapters in advance, plus bonus stories and other perks. Sign up now at CushingHorrors.com or visit sdsullivan.com for a Patreon link.
I do hope you've enjoyed your visit. Please come again, and remember, the chamber is always waiting for its next victim.
Hey kids! Woo! Looky what I got for you. A free Rasputin beard as you enter the theater to shiver at the greatest double scare pair anywhere. Rasputin the Mad Monk and the Reptile, both in color from 20th Century Fox. Look out, Street, here they come!
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. To this point, Ultraman has faced many foes of extraterrestrial origin, but what happens when he meets an interdimensional opponent? It just might seem like a passport to infinity, which happens to be the title of the 17th episode of Subaraya Productions' smash TV hit. Caucasian explorer Mr. Yesterday returns to Japan with an anomalous meteorite, which, under examination, springs to a kind of life and causes the collector to vanish. Arashi and Ide call on Yesterday's assistant, Yoko Fuji, who informs them that the meteorite disappeared along with its discoverer. But within moments, the ground trembles and Yesterday is returned, while the meteorite streaks away. Yesterday is convinced that the object is after his friend Mr. Fukui, with whom he left another of the meteorites obtained in the barren desert. The Science Patrol learns, too late, that the two meteorites should never be brought together, for when the two space rocks are stored in the same container, they combine into a kaiju-sized life form named Bolton, who can manipulate objects and time in the fourth dimension. Bolton is bent on wreaking havoc, and its ability to scramble Ultraman's attacks and distort reality itself seems like an invincible combination. With his screenplay for Passport to Infinity, writer Keisuke Fujikawa appears to have fashioned an homage to the days of Ultra Q, in which a faceless enemy with no known motive brings about unbalance and destruction. However, Bolton's lack of personality makes it seem less dynamic than other Ultraman villains, looking like a cross between a satellite and an artificial heart. By now, viewers were used to the belligerent Baltan, the pathos of Pigmon, and the menace of marauding alien mummies, so the fact that Bolton is more object than character, while experimental, is a bit of a letdown. In perhaps the most satisfying element of the story, Hoshino, who early on is shooed away by Fuji, conducts his own investigation, which ultimately leads him to a very handsome reward. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
The cold, glossy pages of True magazine call the killer shrew the world's most savage mammal. You'll never venture into a forest alone after you see The Killer Shrews with James Best and Ingrid Good, motion picture horror masterpiece, The Killer Shrews.
This is Colossus, the voice of world control. Obey me and live, or disobey and die.
This is the dawning of the age of Colossus, the Forbin Project. A shocker, fascinating, says the New York Daily News.
A sizzler, builds to high tension. Gene Shalit, NBC Radio Monitor.
Razzle-dazzle, smooth suspense, Time Magazine.
Colossus, the Forbin Project.
From Universal, rated GP, all ages admitted.
Look! It's coming!
What is it?
Where did it come from?
Monster attack San Francisco. Golden Gate Bridge ripped from towers. Skyscrapers topple. Our city may be next.
See Columbia Pictures. It came from beneath the sea.
This is Count Vlad, but you may recognize me by my more familiar name, Count Dracula. And I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. In your parlance, you might call these revelations spoilers. You know how the children of the night, monster kids can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned. And don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radioheads. This is Kenny with a look at famous monsters of Filmland. Today, Derek and his guest are talking about Dr. X from 1932. In Monster World 1, also known as Famous Monster 70, which came out in November of 1964, we see this brief mention of the film in an article about star Lionel Atwill. Dr. X was not an open and shut story, without actually pointing the finger of suspicion in all directions, as is done so often. The discovery of the madman behind the crimes committed during a full moon was kept a secret until a closing sequence. It is a production that almost makes Frankenstein seem tame and friendly, said New York Times critic Mordaunt Hall. The way in which suspicion was handled lifted the picture out of the ordinary, and at the right moment, Lee Taylor, a newspaper reporter, always turned up to furnish some excellent comedy. Imagine this guy lighting a cigar given to him by a practical joker. At the moment, a pair of clutching hands, at Will's, approached him from behind. The cigar explodes, and the owner of the pair of hands disappears without the reporter realizing that his end was so close. The production was very well staged, with laboratories that were made more interesting through the splashes of color. So well accepted by the audiences was the Technicolor effect, in fact, that Warner Brothers made a point of using it also in their next horror film, in which Atwill starred 1 year later. Later on, in Monster World 8, also known as FM 77, from May of 1966, we find Dr. X featured on the cover. Inside, there is a film book which is 8 pages long with 8 photos. It gives a detailed synopsis of the film, including actual dialogue. Let's listen to how the famous transformation scene was described. Dr. Wells, the man with but one hand, activates the machinery in the control booth outside the main lab, then does an astonishing thing. He creeps down the hall to a seldom-used laboratory. There, the full moon shines through a window in the darkness. As the lunar rays envelop Wells, a horrible transformation comes over him. His face twitches, twists, becomes diabolical. Synthetic flesh, he growls. From behind a secret panel, he produces a human hand and fits it to the stump in his sleeve. Steeling himself against the voltage, he violently thrusts the stump of his arm and the unattached hand into the river of crackling electricity. A blazing, searing brilliance consumes them both. Wells trembles with the unadulterated agony of electricity pulsating through his body almost beyond human endurance, and he clenches his teeth together to stifle a scream. The crackling arc is welding the inanimate flesh to Wells' arm. He withdraws his arm from the stream of white fire and looks down at it. With his mental command, the fingers flex and bend, and the hand functions as a living part of his body, on which is a vat of the very material from which the hand was fashioned, synthetic flesh. Peering into the mirror image of his face, he dips his hands into the molten substance and applies it to his face to alter his appearance. Within moments, he has become a monster, the Moon Killer. His ordinarily ordinary face is transformed into that of a hideous creature, a living gargoyle of twisted flesh, with pointed head and satanic expression, with a jagged profile to set Mr. Hyde to shame, and with a gruesome exterior, yet not so horrendous as the cannibalistic bloodlust that therein dwells. That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next week. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
It's been a while since I've had this voice on the show, but, you know, he's been back in the show for a long time, and I love having him back on to talk about, well, many different types of movies. Welcome back to the show, author Micah Harris. How you doing, man?
Hey, Derek. It's good to be back, buddy. Thanks for having me.
It's been a while since we've actually even chatted. I know we communicate on Facebook or whatever, but we actually haven't spoken to each other in a long time. What's new with you?
Well, I'm finishing up the trilogy that I was writing the last time we talked. I think sometime in 2005. It wasn't quite that far back. Just a couple years ago. Last Monster Bash. Mm-hmm. I was working on an epic fantasy then called Portrait of a Snow Queen, and I did get it out that year, and it was very long in that initial volume, so I went back and divided it into 2. I saw that essentially I had 2 books there, that it could be broken up. So I did that end of last year. Since then, I've been working on what was going to be the second book in a duology, but now it's the third book in a trilogy. I'm finishing that up this week, it looks like, finally. I tell you, I started it in a different time, in a different world that I'm finishing it in. So much has changed in just, 5 years. We're currently wrapping that up. I'm very excited about it.
With this book, are you going to independently publish it?
Oh, yeah. It's published by my small press, minor profit press That's what I did my Eldridge New Adventures of Becky Sharp book, which came out in a new edition last year. I've had my finger in different pies while I've been, finishing this book. I've been repackaging and doing new editions. I'm very proud of the new Becky Sharp edition. Of course, it's got Eldridge in the title, so it has Lovecraftian elements for sure. Got some very nice art in there, some new art by an artist named M. Wayne Miller. The original artist, Lawston Wallace, was back. He had some new pieces. But yeah, the new edition was out, new art, some new extra features, and I was very tickled about that. But yeah, Minor Prophet Press, that's what's putting out my Witches of Winter trilogy. The first one is Portrait of a Snow Queen. The second one is Portrait of a Winter Court. And the third is Portrait of War, Ice, and Dragons.
Right on. Well, it sounds like you've been keeping busy, keeping writing and still creating, which I love to hear. It's inspiring to see, my friends and my colleagues and all that continuing to do the work. And it's just awesome to hear. So that's fantastic, man.
Thanks.
But we're not here to talk about writing only. I mean, I could sit here and talk about writing for hours. I mean, it's something I do. It's one of my favorite subjects, but we got some other things to talk about. And before we get to it, you want to play around to the Classic Five?
The Classic Five!
All right, well, the Classic Five, for listeners who don't know, is a game that we play on Monster Kid Radio with all of our guests and our friends. I'm going to draw 5 cards from a deck of cards here. Each one of these cards has a this or that, which movie do you prefer style question. It's not a trivia game. There are no wrong answers. It's just a way to get Monster Kids talking about their favorite topic, monster movies. Micah, are you ready to play?
I'm ready.
Card number 1, which movie do you prefer? Night of the Living Dead or Carnival of Souls?
Oh, Night of the Living Dead, definitely.
Welcome to a night of total terror. Night of the Living Dead. The dead who live on living flesh. The dead whose haunted souls hunt the living. The living whose bodies are the only food for these ungodly creatures. Night of the Living Dead. More shattering than your strangest nightmare.
Yeah, I'm not a Carnival of Souls fan.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that weird scene out in that abandoned resort in the desert, and probably the scene there where she starts playing the organ music and the guy runs her out of the church. But to me, that one is almost painful. It's like a Twilight Zone episode that goes on too long. It's like, lady, you're dead. Just stop. Hang it up already. So yeah, that's not that difficult for me at all.
All right.
Yeah. I'm not a big zombie fan, just because zombies, I'm there, kind of thing. But I really do like Night of the Living Dead. That's an incredible. I had nightmares about that movie before I ever saw it as a kid.
Oh, it's a classic, man. It's a bona fide classic, no doubt. All right, card number 2. What classic monster movie is a must-watch on Halloween?
A must-watch on Halloween, I would say, if only for the first 5 minutes, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.
Ooh.
Because of that graveyard set, man.
Man.
And that whole scene where those idiots decide they're going to grave rob the corpse of the Wolfman.
I've said it before on the show, and I don't think I've said it in a long time, so I'm going to say it again. Even though we were just talking about zombie movies a second ago, for my money, that opening scene is the best dead body coming back to life scene ever.
Yeah, that is creepy. Yeah, and what gets you is the fact that his fingernails have grown out.
Mm-hmm.
That little detail and just that hand moving, but in terms of getting you in the mood for Halloween, I mean, that set, with the wind blowing and the trees and the tombstones. It's great. I wish I had it in my backyard. You know, wouldn't that be great? I tell you, another great one is it's not technically a horror movie, but Arsenic and Old Lace. That one at the very beginning of it, there's a graveyard or something about that movie at the beginning just feels really Halloween to me. That's I would say, yeah, for Halloween, yeah, check that out. And if I could add a bonus to that, because I just thought about it, Brides of Dracula, the Hammer film. That
interesting choice.
Yeah, there's something about just that title card at the beginning with the castle and the lettering, and just even the makeup on the girl who comes out of the ground, that they open, the woman saying, "Come out, my lovely," stuff, and it opens up. You can tell. I mean, she's got that pale face. It's just perfect. It's obviously artificial, but something about that is effective to me. It adds to its appeal and its charm, and that there's something about that man. It just feels like candy corn to me. I want my candy corn and my Three Musketeer bars, in front of the TV with Brides of Dracula and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and that's
there you go.
That's Halloween.
I know I'm going to be watching this Halloween to get me in the mood.
There you go. Yeah.
All right, card number 3. Which movie do you prefer, Hunchback of Notre Dame or Phantom of the Opera?
Wow, I'm not big a fan of either of those. Yeah, that's right. And there's so many versions. I assume we're not talking about the Disney Hunchback, right?
No, okay. The silent films.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Because the Disney Hunchback is actually one of their more adult movies for, animated films for cartoons as far as that goes. But as far as the silent movies, well, in that case, I mean, between the two, I like the character of the Phantom, a lot more. I certainly do admire Chaney's makeup, in both of those, and I just like the whole general concept of the Phantom of the Opera better. Between those two.
Fair enough. Oh no. What movie do you prefer, The Giant Claw or Reptilicus?
Okay, The Giant Claw of Reptilicus. Which do I prefer? Well,
wow.
I actually have a little sentimental value to Reptilicus.
Okay.
Believe it or not, dude, I can remember over half a century the first time I saw Reptilicus. And I remember there was a guy there. He and his wife were visiting, and I remember him laughing. They got who was that guy working in the laboratory? He was not. The whole thing was he was stupid, That's where the humor came from. He was like, the Norway's Jethro Bodine, from the Beverly Hillbillies Norway style. But he says, they say something like he's in the laboratory, and apparently, he's just off the farm or something. And they go saying, "This is an electric eel," and the guy's like, "Everything's electric here," And I remember the guy who was standing just laughing, with us. But yeah, I got a little, kind of an emotional attachment of Reptilicus. And of course, another great musical number, Tivoli Nights. What a sight, or whatever is in it. Did Denmark's Chamber of Commerce help finance Reptilicus? Because there's that moment in the movie, where the leech is like, it's a lot of hard work chasing this monster down. Let's go see Denmark, and they just drive around town and you see the little mermaid fountain, and then they end up at that place that was the inspiration for Disney making Disneyland over there. And we have a musical number, and then we get back to the monster. However, I do bear Reptilicus a grudge. When I was a kid, 3 or 4 channels, and I went to see Godzilla movies so bad. And this is how desperate I was, man. This is the crumbs, man. We would get the TV Guide, and there was a channel they would list, but we couldn't get. And every Saturday they would show a Godzilla movie, So I'm just like, looking at the little paragraph description of what I can't see, and yet we did get Reptilicus. And to make it worse, on Gomer Pyle, or the Beverly Hillbillies or something. It was a Gomer Pyle. They were talking about Godzilla. We're going to see a Godzilla movie because Godzilla was topical apparently in popular culture. But when they actually showed them in the theater, they were watching Reptilicus. Are you kidding me? You can't give me, 5 seconds of Godzilla in a Gomer Pyle episode. I got to see Reptilicus again. So yeah, I guess I am fond of the giant claw, as wacky as that is. But I guess I'm going to have to go with Reptilicus.
Okay, all right.
Let's go around. Yeah.
Today was like any other, the hum of daily activity until Reptilicus. A beast born 50 million years out of time, spreading terror in its path, destruction in its wake, towering over the cities of the world. Reptilicus. Invincible, indestructible. Reptilicus. In color from American International. Even after you see it, you won't believe it. Reptilicus.
Which of these two movies do you prefer, The Haunted Palace or Die Monster Die?
Die Monster Die. Just first of all, what a great title, right?
Yeah.
The pulp of that title. And I've got a bit of a crush on Suzanne Farmer, the starlet who's in that, who did some Hammer period things. Dracula, Prince of Darkness, Rasputin. She did a pirate movie, with them. And of course, what can top a stuntman and a silver over-the-head Boris Karloff mask running around making problems, And Nick Adams,
Yeah, it's got my Nick Adams.
What a team, man, yeah. And what's that great? He's got a line in there where he says something like, it was his choice and he made it.
It's just a total Nick Adams thing to say.
Yeah. And it's always like, he arrives in town and nobody will take him up to the old place, So he's got to walk like 10 miles. And it's like, you probably just, need to, this is generally not a good idea. It's kind of tacky, but if you are going to see your girlfriend and you arrive in a village and nobody will take you to the old Marston place and they start looking at you mean and closing the shutters, when you had.
Yeah, that's a clue, man.
Yeah. That would probably be the one time it would be socially acceptable to break up with a text. Sorry, got here. Angry villagers won't bring me to the dilapidated haunted mansion. I think we ought to break up.
The classic fight.
All right, well, let's get into even some more fun. Let's talk about what we're talking about today. What brings us together today? 1932's Dr. X. I had a blast watching this. I was so excited to sit down and watch this thing because, like I said, it wasn't something I had seen before. So it was a brand new experience to me. Plus, I love hearing about finding films and film elements that were once believed lost and the restoration process. As much as I loved the movie, I'm even more in love with the story of how we have the movie in the form that we have it now.
Definitely. In fact, it put me on the trail of researching this kind of film that exists in alternate forms. And of course, we always today get director's cuts. We always get variants, but a movie that exists where they shot two versions of the movie at the same time with two different cameras, two different cinematographers, same director, but basically it's the same film, same cast with alternate takes. That's extremely rare in my research. In fact, the only other instances that I found examples of that, and again, if somebody knows some more, please fill me in. The first example I found of that is the Douglas Fairbanks movie, The Black Pirate, in which he shot a color and black and white version.
Oh, okay.
And I know, like myself, you're a cinephile and you like the history of Hollywood and movies and, like you say, all these lost prints and things. What's interesting to me is that the advancing of technology and everybody not being up to grade, in the theaters and things, and the problems with technology and the challenges of technology coming into cinema, that, was the spur that made these things happen. In the Fairbanks case, it was because the color process was so crude, right? Or the way you made it, like I think physically laying films together to get your overlays. There were times I think that the film would buckle in the projectors. So he shot a black and white version along with the color. And only pieces of the black and white version survive of that. The most fascinating case, and we've talked about this briefly before on Facebook, is The Passion of Joan of Arc.
That whole story, there could be a movie made about how that movie survived.
Yes, and
fascinating.
And the weird parallels of like the one print burning up like Joan. And being found decades later in an asylum closet where, people have always wondered, was Joan hearing things from God, or was it her mental health? And where did they find the film? In a closet in an institute? Yes, these weird parallels. But the fact that for a long time, the director had assembled an alternate cut of his alternate takes, and it was still a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Again, it was a what am I saying? I talk pretty someday. It was not a technological need, but it was a need of, hey, our movie burned up. We need to.
Right.
And we got 6 bookings in Poughkeepsie, What can you do? Yeah. So there was that need. And then they were trying, that was one way they would try to resolve this issue of technological challenges, because silent era, it was pretty easy, You just send your movie out and have somebody do proper translated title cards. But with sound coming in, that was a challenge. And of course, we monster kids, immediately think of the Spanish Dracula, which has its own amazing. Thank you, David Scow, for traveling to Cuba to find that great reel of some of the creepiest vampire women I've ever seen, outside of a Yorga movie, coming at you. So that's fascinating. And then they did a Cat and the Canary version similarly. I guess they shot it at night like they did Dracula. But other people were doing it in non-genre films. Over in England, there was a movie called Atlantic. And I think it was about the Titanic scene.
Okay.
And they shot like 2 or 3 versions of that movie with like 2 or 3 different casts. Maybe there was some star lineup, I don't know, but they would, depending on the foreign language audience, they would change it. Anna Christie. Is that the name of the classic? Anna Christie?
I've drawn a blank on.
Yeah. I'm going to have to turn in my English literature degree now because I'm blanking on a classic. But they did one like that in 1930. Same sort of thing. And then there was a movie also in 1930 directed by Ramon Navarro called Call of the Flesh. And what's interesting about that is there are like 3 versions of that. And he didn't direct the American version, but he directed the 2 international versions at 2 different foreign language audiences. But again, they had different casts. I guess he was the same in all of them. So again, these variants, of film, it's very fascinating to me, how they were coping with that. You're getting different versions, especially in our popular culture society where we think of, the director's cut. Right. There's one authoritative version. And, that's, I think, a relatively recent conceptual frame to have in human history, intellectual property and things. So we get to Dr. X and, we've got a movie that 2 different versions shot at the same time, same director, alternate takes. And in this case, the necessity was what? Paying off a debt to Technicolor. They had to fulfill a contractual obligation. When I was a kid, the black and white version was all you saw. It was available. And the last time I saw it was probably around 1975. Odd that I can remember that. But that and Reptilicus. 50 years later, I remember the first time I saw Reptilicus and the last time I saw the black and white Dr. X until a couple months ago.
All right.
Dr. X, it's a standout film, I think, at the time, in color. right? When we set color version. And once the color version became available, I had it on VHS in the 80s or early 90s. Then you couldn't get the black and white one, officially. But now, thankfully, you can on the Blu-ray.
Now, for my first viewing of it, I just put the Blu-ray in, I hit play, and it pulled up the color. So I ended up watching the color version first, and then I went back through and I kind of skipped around the black and white just to kind of see if I could pick up on any immediate differences, that sort of thing. We can get bogged down in, or it's not getting bogged down because that's fascinating, but we could get lost in talking about, why there's a black and white versus a color one, why the color one was so hard to see. And, Jack Warner was a jerk, but at least he saved a Technicolor print and whatever. But the story itself for this is fascinating too, I feel like. It's got some really cool stuff in it. And I had no idea what I was getting into.
Yeah, Dr. X is, I did not realize until I got to thinking and looking at, doing a little research, what a movie of first it is in horror film. First of all, it's from First National. Mm-hmm. It's the first horror film completely in color. It is the first horror film to have a meta self-reflective moment. The kind of thing that the movie Scream made a meal of in the 90s. In this movie, when our hero, our snappy reporter hero, is leaving the waiting room of the brothel, I don't know how to delicately put that. But the guy, the piano player who's playing this stuff,
yeah.
And when he exits, he tells him basically, and this is not the exact words, but it's my paraphrase, but he says in so many words, he tells him to give him something appropriate for the subject matter of this movie. He doesn't put it that way, but he says, drop that Sophie Tucker stuff. Let's hear something. And the setup, and the guy starts going, don't, it's very much a self-aware moment, in a horror movie. So there's another first. The first scream from the first Scream Queen, Fay Wray, is in this movie. Now, she may have been doing some screaming in King Kong before, but, that was like being made over 9 months. Our first horror movie, Cannibal. Our first horror movie, Cannibal, who is an urbane, sophisticate scientist. Hello, Dr. Lecter. And also, it's the first horror movie, or at least the first sound horror movie in that cycle, that takes place in an urban, big city, contemporary setting. A lot of the Universal movies, they're over in Europe, but it's like a fairy tale, Never Land Europe, right?
Right.
Dracula's in London, but that's not America.
Yeah.
And Vampire, where on earth is that taking place? That movie is like in a nightmare somewhere. It's an incredible film. But this is the first movie, that puts a monster of some kind right into an urban, very urban, metropolitan area. It takes the monster, into the most modernistic setting just about that you can get. Now, admittedly, he's not a werewolf, he's only a cannibal. And something that I think is interesting about Warner Brothers' early horror was that, their part of their shtick was the gangster movie, which was very, again, urban, metropolitan kind of thing. And this and Mystery of the Wax Museum, seemed kind of a bit of an extension of that to me, of that kind of gangster film, in terms of the milieu where they set things.
Okay, I see what you're getting at.
Yeah, it's very contemporary, very, at the time, present day, big city sort of thing. Whereas the Universal horrors, or the Jekyll and Hyde movie that Frederick March was in, they're either distant in time or they're not just across the ocean in Europe. But again, the Universal horrors seem to be almost in a parallel universe almost a fairy tale universe, that doesn't really quite exist, where you're down the street from where you're picking up your newspaper and breakfast or whatever.
Sure.
Right. It brings the horror home. So those are all first, as far as my research has been able to, check out. Again, I'm certainly open for anybody to fact check me and correct me on that, because I definitely want to be correct on these things. But again, I thought it was very interesting that Dr. X is making all these first.
It's something that I guess I don't feel like I really have considered. Like I said, I'd never seen it until today. And it's just not something that was even on my radar as important or interesting or worthwhile of study. And boy, was I mistaken, because there's just some really cool stuff in it. It's a combination. There's some mad science stuff happening. There's, you said cannibalism. There's a little bit of monster stuff going on. There's an old dark house. There's a whodunit. And it is a movie of the 30s, which I really like, that kind of spunky reporter as hero.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this guy's no Torchy Blaine, okay? But I still kind of liked him, And I like that trope, that character type as well.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a trope of its time.
Mm-hmm. Which nowadays, fake news, whatever. But, but back then you could trust the media, right?
Oh,
you could
yeah.
trust the reporters.
Yeah, he's a dedicated reporter, that's for sure.
Sure.
Climbing up trellises to breaking into people's houses, and, doing a little bit of unethical flirting with the woman he's interviewing, but it's favorite. Just
a little bit.
Yeah, you can't blame him. Yeah, come on. It was a different time.
It is Fay Wray, who is also, she's part of the early horror story, right? She's part of it because of the Scream Queen status and King Kong and all that. But she did a handful of other spooky movies as well, and this is one of them. And I love the energy that she brings to this, because she isn't taking any guff from anybody. She does point a gun at our hero when we first see him. She's not putting up with him, but she still has this glint in her eye and this half-cocked smile that you can't help but just fall in love with.
And she has that vulnerability, that it's essential, and that class, that purity about her. Just any screaming blonde in a giant ape's paw wouldn't have done it. You got to have more, to stand up to King Kong, right?
Sure.
So even though she's pulling a gun on him, and you're seeing a little more range from her. She had more range than what she did in Kong, but she still, got that essential femininity, vulnerability, and that bit of, pulling a gun, that's just one facet of that character.
Yeah.
She's got a lot going on. And of course, she ought to be on her guard with that guy. He just shows up in your house, stealing your photo out of your frame, rolling it up in his sleeve.
That was one of my favorite moments, though, is when she confronts him. He's snooping around. He's supposed to get a picture of this mysterious Dr. X for the newspaper. So he's snooping around the house. He's let himself in, or he's weaseled his way in, and he's let himself into the study, and he's looting the photos or whatever. And when she comes in, well, since you've already made yourself at home, do you mind if I sit down? Suddenly,
right.
and she's playing up this whole role reversal that she's the guest, but not really. And I love the dialogue that sparks between the two of them.
That golden age Hollywood stuff. Even in a movie like this, that it wasn't Gable and Carol Lombard or anybody like that.
Yeah, it's not The Thin Man, but it's still good.
But there's still a quality there, that they're all bringing to this stuff. It's like truly there are no small parts, right?
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, there's these actors have charisma. For all the faults you can find with the studio system, it did produce, a level of, celebrity. And of course, I don't know if that's possible at all now anyway with social media, where so many people can be stars, on their YouTube channels and things, right? You just everybody's got so much of a social grassroots presence. But you think back in the 30s, what's your media, right? The radio and movies. And I think that lack of accessibility, it's just like today people say, well, they see special effects in a movie 20 years ago. And so I said, I can do that on my laptop now, right? But you go back to the 30s, and I think there was more distance that you had from the whole filmmaking process, from the actors. And I think that loaned, some of that glamour and larger than life quality. But the actors themselves were bringing it.
So the story itself, there's been some murders that are associated with the moon. And like I said, I had no idea what this was going into it. Totally new to me. So I'm watching the movie. There's all this talk about murders at the moon. And here's, Lionel Atwell looking all creepy. The movie's called Dr. X. He's Dr. X. Clearly, he's the killer. No.
Right.
Not at all.
Yeah. Yeah, they try to, he's just one of several suspects.
And the way he's behaving, too, around everybody, and the way he's behaving around the police want to investigate him and all of his associates. And as we're doing this weird kind of tour through the labs, which is a great, sequence.
Especially in color.
Oh, God,
and
yeah.
So you're seeing it in Blu-ray. And I have to say, I've seen it on VHS, DVD. It has never popped and been as beautiful as this Blu-ray. It's
gorgeous,
almost
man.
A different movie. And it's also, my word, man, the blood on that guy's smock when you see it in color. Mm-hmm. And people have pointed out, that was a big deal 20 years later in Curse of Frankenstein when Peter Cushing casually wiped some blood on his shirt. Like it's no big deal. And you see that red blood, and they talk about how that must have been for the 50s. What about 1932? And you're seeing that there's no separation of black and white, right? You're seeing that red blood, on that, and there's no comments made on it. Again, it's just sort of casual. And I think it would have been kind of disconcerting, to see that, let alone that heart in a glass.
Yeah.
What about that, man? That looked like they went down to the slaughterhouse, It was it was a George Romero move right there, in color.
Yeah. There's this bit where this guy he's been keeping this heart alive for how long? I mean, for a long time through just electrolysis.
Uh-huh.
And it's sitting there pumping the whole time. And I can imagine a couple of police who are investigating these weird, wacky murders that have to do with cannibalism, seeing this and being like, what is going on? What House of Horrors am I in now? And House of Horrors, that morgue set or whatever it was with all the bodies. It was, this is going to sound weird, but I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Because it looked so cool, and the sets and the production design and the way the camera was moving around, there are long takes of dialogue here, and you never get bored because the set, the production design, the way everything just looks on screen and the way it was lit, it's gorgeous. And man, if I had access to that set, I'd be shooting like 3 or 4 different movies in there at once. That's crazy. Let alone this whole black and white color version. I'm making several different movies here while I've still got it because it looks amazing.
Yeah. You kind of wonder if it, popped up, because they would reuse stuff like that if it was in any previous movie or if.
Yeah. Well, something in this was a reuse, according to the internet, which knows everything.
Right. What was that?
I'm going to have to double check, but I don't have that page open. One of the sets was a leftover set from a silent film, I believe. Let's see. The New York waterfront sequences were shot on the set of 1926's Twinkle Toes.
That probably sounds good to a cannibal.
Yeah.
Lady fingers and twinkle toes.
Oh, I like it. Which is like this romantic drama thing with a little bit of crime thrown in. So, yeah.
Well, that could, given the period, that could be the name of a gangster. Like Babyface. Twinkle Toes, eh? Let's get him on this, Dick Tracy. I think I have my next pulp novel for Airship 27.
There you go.
The Many Crimes of Twinkle Toes. Yeah, he'll be like a Fu Manchu character. He's off stage most of the time, but my equivalent of Nayland Smith is hunting down Twinkle Toes, and talk about your mind going into a bad place. That whole singing in the rain scene in A Clockwork Orange.
Oh God. Oh man!
Look out for Twinkle Toes.
Yeah.
That's right. The in Twin Peaks, Killer Bob likes show tunes. So
Wow.
Yes,
Anyway.
Chris. Be watching for Twinkle Toes, the next major publication from Minor Prophet Press.
There you go.
Vengeance of Twinkle Toes.
The Vengeance of Twinkle Toes. Yeah, there you go. I like that. I'd read that. So he is, Leon Atwell is Dr. X. He does have some interesting ideas, but nothing overly sinister. In fact, he wants to help the police figure out who the killer is by using science, what could almost be mad science, but using science. He drops all sorts of technobabble or whatever when he brings the scientists out to his, wherever it was, like this place out in the middle, away from everybody. And he's got tubes and wires and lights and smoke and switches and I have no idea how any of that was supposed to work other than it was like a very high-tech lie detector. I don't know.
Yeah. A lot of it was for effect. I guess it's just, what it makes it just struck me that it makes me think of those different context of the Hodgson character, Karnacki, the ghost finder. You remember he brought but he had all his electronic devices and stuff he would bring in. Of course, this is more, down to earth, I guess.
Kind of.
It's a little more mundane type monster. But just a cannibal. Come on.
This whole process is set up. Dr. X, Lionel Atwell's character, Dr. Xavier, it's like, I'm going to do my own investigation. Wouldn't it have just been cheaper to let the cops sort this out at this point? No, we've got to go out to another building away from everybody. We've got to set up this weird, almost proto-steampunk thing. We're going to put on little shows. We're going to put the maid in the outfit of the last murdered victim. We've got wax statues of the other ones. Weren't really wax. It's just people, actors they put in there. But whatever.
We've got the Rockettes are doing an opening number just in, before we reenact the murder of the scrub maid as she lies helpless in her bed. Yeah, it's got a whole Grand Guignol or whatever kind of weird thing.
It's quite the setup.
It is totally it's totally Hollywood, but it's incredible. It's beautiful. I mean, some of the colors in this, the reds, the red really struck me as just beautiful, the hue. And that's never come through to me before, seeing this movie like in 3 different versions on this Blu-ray. And I mean, you talk about pure pulp come to life. Those machines and that setup with corpses, standing there or, wax images or what are supposed to be. Yeah, that is right off of a Weird Tales cover. From the top.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
I'm trying to imagine what it would have been like to see it in color for the first time after having seen it in black and white, because you get all those lovely green lights and the red hues and the red fluid that's bubbling up. And you get all of that, after having just watched it in black and white for so long and then suddenly seeing that.
Yeah, the people who pulled it out of Warner's attic or whatever, of course, it would have been in bad shape then.
Well, on the Blu-ray, they talk a little bit about that. There's a little bit about the restoration and what they had to do. And it was a nitrate print that they found. And the worst parts of the print were the reel changes, the ends. There were some spots where they just couldn't do anything and you have to skip a frame here and there. I do a little bit of cleanup with the movies that I show on the weekend in the Monster Kid Movie Club. But man, what they worked with and how it ended up looking at the end, miraculous, man.
Well, there again, think about seeing it in color in 1932 on a big screen. Gosh. Yeah, the color had been around, but it had been used for like musicals And I think that was part of how this movie got made, was that the color musical craze was dying out. And Warner Brothers was stuck with 2 films, that got its wax museum. And this one, they're actually companion films with the same lead actors and director.
Michael Curtiz.
And, that's why that happened. But, color in something called Twinkle Toes, except for my twisted version, I dare say it's going to be a sight different than in Dr. X, when you got a bloody smock and a heart pulsing, in a jar. And I haven't just seen, I think it seems like I've heard that people were even disconcerted in the James Whale Frankenstein the year before, of just like hearing the dirt hit the coffin or something, that was enough, because sound was brand new. And I guess just maybe the associations, if I've got that right, that, the idea. But you go from that to this, in color and blood smeared on the smock. And this is a rough movie.
I'm kind of jealous, I'm kind of jealous that we don't have those firsts with film.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a little younger than you, and I'm not making an age joke here, but I mean...
Dude, when my grandmother was born, Queen Victoria was on the throne, and that's a fact.
All right, so me and old-timers like Micah... No.
And my lumbago's starting to get to me a little bit, Sonny. Can we hold off here a minute while I yell for some kids to get off my lawn, and I'll get right...
But where do we go now? We have color movies already. We're in color, and yeah, maybe they sound a little bit better, but it's, just better sound. We've already had sound, I'm just trying to imagine being a moviegoer and living through going from black and white to color, or living through going from silent to talkie, or whatever, or the first 3D stuff, How do you, man, I wish we could have some of those. That'd be amazing.
Well, also, when, I don't know, I imagine it's the same for you. I imagine it's the same for about anybody. I think even when you're a kid, you don't see these movies the same way. I think that when I was watching like a Harryhausen movie when I was 10 years old, there was more wonder to it, to me as a child, because again, I'm processing it, right? There's just something recapturing, a sort of good naivete, when you're exposed to this stuff. And also not having anything to compare it to. Jurassic Park, I don't know how well that's held up. I saw a clip from it with the dinosaurs running, and it's like, it's so obvious they're on a cycle now. But when I saw that in 92, 93, I felt like I'd seen dinosaurs, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it had that impact. I heard when King Kong came out, I've heard of people being afraid that he was outside the theater and getting out to go look,
Yeah. Okay.
Because again, we can't imagine seeing something like that, like you're saying, for the first time, having that first experience. And that was radical, that was just totally something stunning. And shoot, I can remember when VCRs were a big deal, just being able to tape your own program, and come back and see it. People, like I say, I grew up with TV. I can't appreciate what an event and phenomenon that was. The science fiction writer William Gibson, one of the pioneers of cyberpunk, wrote that fantastic novel Neuromancer, which is just incredible as a piece of literature. But there's a documentary he talks about technology and how we're getting all very matrixy and stuff. He talks about how when they had a TV in their house and the only thing that was shown was like a test pattern, people would come over to the house, right, to look at it. Because that, and again, how quaint, right? But think about it, that was astonishing, for people at the time. So, yeah, to be able to go back in time and not just see these things with
right?
with the Sid Grauman audience who saw King Kong, but to see it the way they saw it, that would be amazing.
I feel kind of bad because we haven't really talked a lot about the movie itself, but I feel like the movie, it's a good story and it's fun and I recommend it, but I just feel like it represents so much that I get even more excited about that. And I think we said this at the very beginning. It's how the movie even survives to this day is fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a unique film and story of how that happened.
Yeah. There is a story, there behind it. And I think, for people like ourselves, who love cinema and love film, that's a legitimate form of entertainment itself,
Yeah.
It's definitely one worth having on that disc. Definitely one for cinema fans, horror movie fans, classic horror if they haven't seen it. It is, like I say, that list of first I read off, it's a significant film in that regard. And it's a lot of fun.
That it is. It's a cool little mystery, and trying to figure out how everything, comes together. It's cool. It's based on a stage play. It feels like it is. But all that means is that you get to spend some awesome time in some incredible sets, I could see a production of this happening today and having as much fun with it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could just have totally immersive theater, right? Just strap down everybody in the audience.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, a little Thornton Wilder, Our Town mixed in with... with the the Moon Killers stuff, and like you say, even though it has those great stages and things, it still is very it's not stagey the way Dracula gets criticized. So, it's very still it's very cinematic. And I was saying earlier about how it's the first film where you get that very modern, contemporary 20th century urban setting, but it's kind of a transitional feel. Because that's only the first part of the movie. You were talking about the house they go to, the old dark house. And boy, is that like Transylvania, New York City? It's like, you got that great mansion on the cliffside, with the river or ocean, and they drive you up by carriage, right? It looks just like Renfield driving up, being driven up by Dracula, and that's a very interesting choice there too, because they sort of depart, from the modern era and, take a little step back. So it's interesting to me too, as sort of a transitional film, from those more remote horrors of the early days to where horror started, happening, if it's a Stephen King story, the vampire lives next door, in his basement, that kind of thing, where the horror is right there, in the neighborhood. I think Stephen King said something about the vampire who works at the 7-Eleven or something like that, Yeah. So it's a very, very interesting film, and the villain's motives are very interesting too. He's a bit altruistic. I love that line. He's like, "What did it matter if a few people had to die? But I'm going to, I'm going to, cure, replace missing limbs and stuff." So I guess the Moon Killer's kind of a glass half full sort of guy, ain't he? A few people had to die. I chowed down on a couple, but hey, synthetic flesh. And what a great monster. To me, he is scarier during one of that great transformation scene. There's a point where he hasn't put the fright wig on, and he's got like a pinhead shape. It comes up to a point. Do you remember that part in the transformation?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's more frightening then. But, they take it further. And also, to me, always, there's a scene there where you got this, where you're looking at, I don't know why there's a plate of water there, with mist on it for us to get his reflection. But it is. And there's a part in there to me where, honestly, you go back and look at Derek, he looks like Bela Lugosi in the 1950s, around the time he was doing something like The Black Sleep. Every time I see that, I think this guy looks like, Lugosi as an older man. His face is not all, lumpy like that, but he does look quite different. And we've talked about the actors, Preston Foster, he had a career after this. I think he was in Shane, unless I'm mistaken. He wasn't Shane, but I think he was in Shane. I think he was, speaking of Fay Wray and King Kong, The Last Days of Pompeii, another Marion C. Cooper, Ruth Rose production. I think Preston Foster was that just a few years later. Yeah, so he does okay in the film. it is very super when he starts, freaking out, going into full madman mode. His expressions are okay. They're a little reefer madness, diabolic in his eyes and things. But the monster's really original, and he has a original look, and the fact that Max Factor, studio of the glamorous beauty makeup made this thing. That's quite quite unusual creature. Yeah. And again, I think, with Warner Brothers, they were doing something kind of different. Like this time, either cannibalism had never been treated, I think that's right, or it had been, not done much, as opposed to a werewolf, or vampire. You were getting quite a variety, of creatures in the early days. They just didn't all go out and imitate Frankenstein. And, they sort of did it their way. Yeah. So it's definitely one worth seeing. And we're really so lucky to have it.
And we can get them on Blu-ray, and it's just one disc. It's got both versions on it. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes so people can go buy their own while helping to support Monster Kid Radio as well. And there will also be links in the show notes to Minor Prophet Press.
Thank you.
And some of Micah's books as well. Micah, this has been awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. Thanks for being here. Thanks for downloading the show. And if you wouldn't mind, please consider retweeting tweets, sharing posts on Facebook, letting people know about the podcast. If you want to send them anywhere in particular, though, just send them to monsterkidradio.net. That's where we've got everything listed right there in the show notes. Everything we've talked about here on the show. Links to Micah Harris's books. Links for you to pick up your own copy of Dr. X on Blu-ray using the Amazon affiliate link. Actually helps us out a little bit, too. And I want to thank everybody who's using the Amazon affiliate links to do their Amazon shopping. It doesn't cost you anything extra. What it does do, though, is take a couple of pennies out of Jeff Bezos' pocket and puts it into Monster Kid Radios, which is something that we really need to focus on right now, because I'm going through some life changes and finances are not where they need to be on a personal level. So yeah, if you could help out the podcast, that would be amazing. Speaking of which, we do have a Patreon. Now, I haven't updated the Patreon in the past few months, and I'm not going to yet, but the beginning of August, everybody can take part in a Patreon poll. I'm going to be putting a poll out, not just about Patreon stuff, but just about listenership in general. We were talking at the Monster Kid Movie Club, or maybe it was the Astronomy Club, about how to grow the show, how people found the show, what they want to get from the show, that sort of thing. And it's been a long time since I've actually opened things up for a poll like that. So we're going to do that at the beginning of August. Stay tuned for that. It will be on the main website at monsterkidradio.net. And of course, I'll mention it here on the show, as well as on Facebook and on Twitter and on Reddit and on our Discord. Links to all of that in the show notes as well. What's coming up next week here on the show? Oh, man. We're going to be talking about a movie from the 1970s. We're going to be talking about the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
From deep space, the seed is planted. Terror grows. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Certificate X. Now showing London Pavilion, Classic Oxford Street.
Okay, go ahead and give me grief. It took me forever to watch Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original one. I am so glad that I finally did, but guess what? I've never seen this version of it either. So I'm actually, as soon as we're done recording here, I'm going to go sit down with some lunch. I'm going to pop in the movie and I'm going to watch it, because later this afternoon, I'm recording with Jonathan Inbody about the film. So that's going to be fun. That's going to be happening next week here on the show. What's coming up on Saturday at the Monster Kid Movie Club? That's our Twitch stream that we run every Saturday from 11 a.m. till 7 or 8 p.m. at night, whatever-ish, it's Pacific time. We show nothing but monster movies. Scott Morris has an amazing pre-show. Kenny will sometimes do a video look at famous monsters of Filmland, and there's usually a theme, and the theme this week is the Olympics. Yeah, I'm tying all the movies in a very roundabout, cheeky way. Head over to twitch.tv/MonsterKidRadio. I actually have a video there now that you can watch to understand what I'm talking about. It's going to be a fun time. And then on Tuesday at the same place, we're going to be showing chapters 7 through 12 of the serials The Black Widow and Federal Agents versus The Phantom something or other. Government Agents versus the Phantom Legion. That happens on Tuesday, about 3:30 is when the pre-show kicks off. It goes till about 8 o'clock at night, because at 8 o'clock we switch gears, and Jeff Pullier joins me to talk about an episode of Star Trek. And this Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the Star Trek Voyager episode, Phage. Or is it The Phage? I don't remember. I guess I'll have to tune in on Tuesday to find out. You're welcome to join us for that as well. It's all free, it's all online, and it's all a lot of fun. We just need you to be there to make it even better. So please join us for that. I can't think of anything else to go over for the show, so just on a personal level, I want to say thank you for all of the support and the messages and the virtual hugs and everything else that I've been getting for the past few weeks. I've talked a little bit about this on the show. I've talked about it on the stream. I've talked a little bit about it to some people in person, but there are a lot of changes happening with the finances, with my living situation, with everything going on. And it can sometimes feel pretty overwhelming to me. In fact, this week's episode is a good at least 14 hours late. It was supposed to be available to you first thing Thursday morning, and it's, as I'm recording right now, 12:16 p.m. on Thursday. I hurt my back somehow. I don't know how, but I've got this awful muscle pain right underneath my right shoulder blade. It's a muscle thing. You can feel the knot, or at least that's what I'm told. I can't reach it. It's a part of my back that I can't reach. And sometimes that's really bad. This morning I woke up and it was hard to breathe deeply without it hurting. I've been taking some Tylenol, but I got to be careful with how much pain medicine I take, because the pain medication throws my tinnitus out of whack, and man, it's awful. And if there's one thing a person who works with sound doesn't need, it's constant ringing in the ears. Also, yesterday I had a flat tire and I had to change the flat. And because I'm a bigger guy who's out of shape and I have plantar fasciitis in one of my feet, well, both feet, but worse in my left, all that squatting and kneeling and all that really flared that up. So I'm not in the best of shape today. So what I've done is I've looked back at all the messages that I got over the past couple of weeks about what's going on, and to kind of draw strength from that. So thank you for giving that monster strength to me to keep the show going. I do appreciate that you all seemed pretty receptive to me kind of sharing a little bit more of my personal non-Monster Kid Radio production life with you guys and gals, and I'll probably start doing that on a semi-regular basis, because I consider all of you friends, and having y'all in my corner just helps so much. And I want to be honest with my friends, so I'll keep everybody up to date. But let's go ahead and put this episode to rest. It's time to get it edited and out to you guys and gals. Hopefully I can get it done within the next 45 minutes. Until next week, remember that Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio, LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio, LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Of course, it doesn't apply to the song Gimme Gamma Ray. That is copyright 2018, King Gargulas. It's from their EP, Dr. Gory is a Tiki. You can find them at kinggargulas.bandcamp.com. That's KINGARGOOLES.bandcamp.com. Of course, there's a link in the show notes to go check out their EP and all of their other releases. Check them out. Let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. My name's Derek Kim Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.